The Englischer Garten, German for English Garden, is a large public park in the center of Munich, Bavaria, stretching from the city center to the northeastern city limits. It was created in 1789 by Sir Benjamin Thompson, later Count Rumford, for Prince Charles Theodore, Elector of Bavaria.Thompsons' successors, Reinhard von Werneck and Friedrich Ludwig von Sckell, advisors on the project from its beginning. Both extended and improved the park, with an area of 3.7 square kilometers. The Englischer Garten is one of Europe's largest urban public parks, larger than New York's Central Park. The name refers to its English garden form of informal landscape, a style popular in Britain from the mid-18th century to the early 19th century and particularly associated with Capability Brown. History of the gardens. Creation. When the Elector of Bavaria Maximilian III Joseph, the last ruler from the Bavarian branch of the Wittelsbach dynasty, died childless in 1777, the land passed to the electorate of the Palatinate Archduke and Elector Karl Theodore. The new ruler preferred his home on the Rhine in Mannheim and tried unsuccessfully to trade this unwanted inheritance of Bavaria for the Austrian Netherlands. Understandably, the people of Munich returned his dislike. To offset this unhappy atmosphere, Karl Theodore devoted much attention to improvements in the city. Among others, he created an art gallery in the northern arcades of the residence's Hofgarten, and made both the garden and the gallery open to the public. While the Hofgarten was the only public park in Munich, it was not the primary motivation for creating the English Garden. Rather, it was part of a series of military reforms being pursued under the guidance of Sir Benjamin Thompson, his chief military aide, later made Count Rumford and Bavarian War Minister. Born in Massachusetts, Thompson had served on the Loyalist side in the American Revolutionary War, and after the British defeat had returned first to England before moving to Europe and entering Karl Theodore's service in 1784. In 1788, Thompson proposed that in peacetime the majority of soldiers should be given leave to do civilian work such as farming and gardening. In February 1789, Karl Theodore decreed that military gardens should be laid out in each garrison city to provide soldiers with good agricultural knowledge and serve as recreation areas, accessible also to the public. The planned location for the Munich Gardens was the area north of the Schwabinger city gate, hunting grounds of the Wittelsbach rulers since the Middle Ages. Known as the Hirschange, the higher part of the grounds closer to the city was included, while the Hirschau, also meaning deer enclosure, lower and further north, was not originally part of the plan. Nor was a more densely wooded part to the south known as the Hirschauschenwald. The whole area had been subject to flooding from Munich's river, the Isar, a little to the east. This problem was soon removed by the construction of a river wall in 1790, which became known as the Riedel Dam, after the engineer Anton von Riedel, who had supervised its construction. The construction of the military garden was begun in July 1789, and an area of 800 by slightly less than 200 meters was quickly made ready for cultivation. But soon the idea was extended to the creation of a public park, of which the military garden should be only a small part. On August 13, 1789, Karl Theodore published a decree, devoting the Hirschange to the amusement of the people of Munich. To advise on the project, the royal gardener Friedrich Ludwig Sckell, who had studied landscape gardening in England and had previously worked for Karl Theodore at Schwetzingen, had been summoned to Munich earlier in August. Various associated projects were made part of the park development, among them the 11 Garten, a garden for the pupils of the recently formed military academy, a Schweizerie, Schäferei, and Ackerbauschule, to improve farming techniques. and a Viehhausnichtschule for the treatment of cattle diseases. Most of these projects did not long survive the creation of the park, but the veterinary school went on to become what is now the Tierärztliche Fakultät of the Ludwig Maximilians Universität. The gateway from 1790 can be seen at the Veterinairstrasse entrance to the garden. The park was initially named Theodore's Park, but it very quickly became known by the descriptive name, the English Garden. By May 1790, sufficient progress had been made to allow Carl Theodore to make an inspection tour, but it was first in the spring of 1792 that the park was officially opened to the approximately 40,000 citizens of Munich. Further development: Thompson left Munich in 1798. His successor, Baron von Werneck, attempted to make the garden pay for itself through its agricultural use. To that end, he expanded the park in December 1799 to encompass the Hirschau, which was improved to provide pasture. The fields of the military gardens were added to the Englischer Garten in January 1800. Werneck's improvements had been costly, and in 1804 he was replaced by Sckell, who was given the post of Bayerischer Hofgartenintendant. Although Sckell had had a guiding role from the beginning, many aspects of the execution differed from his ideas, which he set out in a memorandum of 1807. His long supervision of the garden was marked by a movement away from agricultural use and concentration on the landscape garden. For instance, 2 mills at the point where the Schwabinger back leaves the eyes back were removed, and an artificial waterfall was created in 1814 to 1815. Under Sckell, the park took on its modern form. The only significant addition since then was the creation of the hill for the monopteros by his nephew Carl August Sckell, who succeeded him as director of the park. In the 20th century, there have been minor additions to the park, most notably the addition in 1952 of 30 hectares of land, where the locomotive factory of Joseph Anton von Maffei had stood, and in 1958 to 62 of a further 67 hectares from the Hirschauer Force. The century almost brought less welcome changes to the park. In the Second World War, bombing damaged the monopteros and destroyed the Chinesische Turm, and 93,000 cubic meters of rubble were dumped in the Hirschauer. The area was only cleared in 1953, when a sports ground for schools was made in its place. Transport too has harmed the character of the garden, most notably with the construction in 1963 of the Eisering, part of Munich's Central Ring Road, which divides the park just north of the Kleinhesseler See. Towards the end of the century, the city of Munich wished to construct a tram route through the garden north of the Chinese Tower, currently a road used only by buses, but it was opposed by the Bavarian government, which owns the land, and the Bayerische Verwaltungsgerichtshof rejected the plan. There were also natural disasters. Many trees were destroyed by severe storms in 1964, 1988 and 1990. Dutch elm disease has almost destroyed the elm population of the park. Both kinds of losses were compensated by a tree donation campaign organized by Munich's Zeitung in 1989 to 1990 on the occasion of the park's 200-year anniversary. Among the 1,500 new trees that could be planted were 1,000 elms, using only varieties resistant to Dutch elm disease. Sights and attractions. Japan issues tea house in April 1972 to celebrate the Summer Olympics of that year, which were held in Munich. A Japanese tea house and a Japanese garden were created on a small island at the south end of the Englischer Garten, behind the Haus der Kunst. The pond in which the island is set had been created only a few years earlier, in 1969. The tea house was a gift to Bavaria from Soshitsu Sen, head of the Urasenka Tea School in Kyoto. Its designers were Soshitsu Sen and Mitsuo Nomura. A traditional Japanese tea ceremony takes place here regularly. Schönfeldweiß and surroundings between the Monopteros and the Japanisches tea house lies the Schönfeldweiß. In this part of the gardens nude sunbathing has been permitted since the 1960s, something which many Germans practice. It caused quite a sensation at the time and also made the English gardens well known, even outside Munich. The Schönfeldweiß proper lies to the south of the Schwabinger Bach, which crosses the English Garden at this point before flowing northwards along its west side, but the name is sometimes used of the whole larger, open space. The expanse to the north of the Schwabinger Bach, the Karl Theodor Suisse, has the oldest construction in the park. The Bergfriedsaal, a boundary marker from 1724, topped with the Münchner Kindel, stands in a grove of trees below the Monopteros, surfing in one of the artificial streams flowing through the Englischer Garten. There is a standing wave produced by the water pumping mechanism. Surfers line up along the bank taking turns entering the water with the boards. After a minute or so, successful surfers will voluntarily drop out, returning to the end of the line, allowing the next person in line an opportunity. The signage states that surfing should only be done by expert or skilled surfers. A short video of the swimming and surfing can be found here. Monopteros. When the nearby wooden Apollo temple had fallen into disrepair, an early idea of Sckell's for a hilltop temple was taken up and a new stone building of similar design was commissioned. This small, round, Greek-style temple was designed by Leo von Klenz. It was built on a 15 meters high foundation, around which a small hill was created in 1832, using leftover building material from recent work on the Munich residence. Hill and temple were completed in 1836. 10 Ionic columns support a shallow copper-covered dome. Palmettes adorn the cima. A particular feature of the Monopteros is the use of polychrome stone painting, an interest of Klenz at the time, who intended the building to serve as a model for its use. Steinernbank. Before the Monopteros was built, a small circular temple had stood by the Eisbach a little to the south of the Chinesischer Turm, designed by Johann Baptist Lechner and erected in 1789. It became known as the Apollo Temple after an Apollo statue by Joseph Nepomuk Muxel was added to it in 1791. While the basis of the temple was tough, the temple itself was wooden, and by the early 18th century, this had fallen into disrepair. In 1838, Leo von Klenz built an extra stone bench in place of the temple, with the inscription, Hier wo ihr wollt, da wo sonst wollt ihr und Sumpf. The temple's circular basis served as the basis for the curved bench. Chinesischer Turm Tower. The Chinesischer Turm is a 25 meters high wooden structure, first constructed in 1789 to 1790, from a design by the Mannheimer military architect Joseph Frey. It was modelled on the Great Pagoda in the Royal Botanic Gardens in London. The pagoda, twice as high as the tower, was supposed to resemble a porcelain pagoda in the gardens of a Chinese emperor. The Munich Tower has 5 stories. The ground story roof has a diameter of 19 meters, the topmost story of 6 meters. On July 13, 1944, the original tower burned down after heavy bombing, but a society to rebuild it was formed in 1951, and the new tower, made true to the original by consultation of detail photos and old drawings, was completed in September 1952. Surroundings. A wooden Chinese Eacherworth shaft, designed by Lechner, was added in 1790. In 1912, this was replaced by the modern stone building, which reflected the original design. With 7,000 seats, the beer garden at the Chinesischer Turm is the second largest in Munich. In the late 19th century, up to 5,000 servants, handworkers, soldiers and students would come to the tower early on a Sunday morning to dance to the music of a brass band. The dance began around 5:00 and ended around 8:00, so that servants could return to serve their employers breakfast or attend church. As a dance for servants, it was known as the Cochal Ball. In 1904 the custom was forbidden by the police on moral grounds, but in 1989, to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the park, a revival was made, with around 4,000 attending, and the dance has since been celebrated each year in July. A children's carousel was put up near the tower in 1823, similar in design to the current one. By 1912 a replacement was needed, which is still in use. It was designed by the Schwabinger sculptor Joseph Erlacher and the decoration painter August Julia. Alongside the usual horses, the carousel has less expected creatures to ride, such as ibex, stork and flamingo. Its wooden roof and pillars were restored from 1979 to 1980. South of the tower are the Oeconomage board, which were designed by Lechner towards the end of the 18th century as a model farm. Today, the Oeconomage board are occupied by the management of the Englischer Garten. Rumfordsaal, a little to the north of the chinesische Turm. The Rumfordsaal, or Rumford House, is a small building in Palladian style. During its construction it was known as the Großer Saal or Militärsaal, but it was later renamed to honor the garden's founder, Benjamin Thompson, Count Rumford. It was built in 1791 by Lechner as an officers' mess and was used first by the army, later by the court. The building, 30 meters long and 10 meters wide, has 1.5 stories. Front and back have a portico with 6 wooden Ionic pillars. Its dining hall, adorned with many mirrors which give it its name, the Spiegelsaal, has room for 150 people. The building is currently used by the city of Munich as a children's center. Kleinhesse-Lorsee. The Kleinhesse-Lorsee was created under Werneck's direction around 1800 between the districts of Schwabing, at the time a village north of Munich, and Kleinhesse-Lohe. Kleinhesse-Lohe had been the original northern limit of the park, with a watch house and a gate to the northern Hirschau. The park warden there had set up an improvised beer shop for workers in the park. This soon expanded to offer milk and cold meals and came to be a favored stop for walkers in the park, especially after a wooden dance place had been added. Werneck's successor Sckell increased the size of the lake by 1.5 times in 1807 to 1812, giving it its present form. It is constantly fed by water from the Eisbach. 3 islands can be found within the lake's 86,410 square meters. Königsinsel, Gerferseninsel and Regenteninsel. Sckell's enlargement of the lake brought it close to Kleinhesse-Lohe, and the little beer garden that was to be a forerunner of the modern sea house, with 2,500 seats. In 1882 to 1883, Gabriel von Seidel built a boathouse with food service. This was replaced with a new building by Rudolf Festerer in 1935, with a terrace overlooking the lake. This was very popular until 1970, when it was demolished. A competition for a new design was won by Alexander von Branca, with a design modeled on a Japanese village, but the work was found too costly and never executed. For 15 years service was from temporary buildings, until in 1985 the current sea house was built to a design by Ernst Hurlimann and Ludwig Wiedemann. Today, the lake and the sea house are well-loved leisure destinations. Pedal boats are also leased here to those who want to splash around. 2 monuments near the lake honor its creators. The Werneck Denkmal, a monument to Werneck, stands on a rise near the east side. It was erected in 1838 on Ludwig I's suggestion to a design by von Klenz. A little south of it, on the bank of the lake, the Sckell honors Ludwig von Sckell. This, also designed by von Klenz, was erected in 1824, a year after Sckell's death. The design was executed by Ernst von Bandel, who would later be known as the creator of the Hermanns Denkmal. Herschau. The English Garden is divided into two portions by the busy Isering Road. The southern part is around 2 kilometers long, while the northern part, called the Herschau, is around 3 kilometers long. In contrast to the southern part, which on sunny days contains as many people as one would find in a medium-sized town, the Herschau has a peaceful character. In the southern part, the grass in the open expanses must be kept short, but in the Herschau some meadows are allowed to grow and mown for hay in June and August, while others are used as pasture for sheep. 2 beer gardens, the O-Meister, built in 1810–11 by the court mason Joseph Dalemeyer, and the Herschau, built in 1840, are located at the north and south end of the Herschau respectively. The northern part of the garden also contains a small amphitheatre, built in 1985 and called the New Amphitheatre. The new amphitheatre is used for open-air performances in summer. To the east, the Herschau's border is formed by the Isar, which can be crossed at the Oberforing Dam, built between 1920 and 1924, and at the Emmeram Bridge, a wooden pedestrian bridge first built in 1978. The bridge was destroyed by arson in 2002, and replaced by a new design in 2004. Statistics. Area: 3.73 square kilometers. Total length of paths and walkways, roughly 75 kilometers. Length of streams, 8.75 kilometers. Bridges, over 100. Number of bird species that breed in the garden.